guys, it's Bound to Divide with Ableton Tips, and today we're going to be making 3 common types of bass lines you would hear in melodic house. And I've got a few reference tracks for this. The first one is going to be this plucky kind of groovy bass line, similar to the one that you'll hear in Marsh, Lost in You, and it sounds like this. And the second one's this sustained, like, perfect fifth bass line that you'd hear in Enamour Ruby, especially in that final section of the track. And then the last one's the rolling kind of bass line that you'd hear in Tinlicker Children. It's also in a ton of other stuff. But yeah, this is what it sounds like. Let's start off with that groove plug, and we're going to be making it in analog. I'm just going to duplicate this channel, and this is the MIDI that we're working with. So if you wanted to just follow along, you could copy down these notes so that you're hearing the same thing as me. And we're going to be using analog, so I'm just going to switch off these 2 plugins here, and I'm going to recreate it. So let's go and open up a new instance of analog here. Okay, so for this type of sound, you probably just want to get a general understanding for the thought process behind it. You might not want to make this exact version of it. Maybe you want to improvise a little bit and make something a bit different. So just understand that the process is to take some sort of waveform that has harmonics, usually a saw wave, or maybe even a square wave, and then you're running it through a low pass filter, giving it some resonance, maybe some drive, and then just EQing it really. So it's a really simple process. Don't overthink it. So yeah, let's get started. So we're going to switch off oscillator 2, and we're just going to focus on oscillator 1 now. And on its own, it sounds like this. Okay, so let's first shape the amp envelope of the sound. So let's go into this amp over here, and we're just going to bring down and click on the square, and we can drag it around. And we basically just want it to be a nice plucky sound. We don't want it to be too short because we're still going to be filtering it and doing majority of the shaping using the filter. So I always like to leave, a bit more of a sound that we can carve away rather than having something too short that we can't really do anything with. So yeah, the number I've got here is 835 milliseconds decay with 0 sustain. And now when I play that sound, you might hear certain notes are overlapping. Especially over there, you can hear it when it goes up and back down. These notes overlap and it kind of sounds a bit ugly. So we need to go into the global here and just make sure that we bring this down to mono. At the moment it's set to 8 voices, so that'll stop any overlapping. Okay, and then we can also go here into the amp envelope and just bring down the release to about 52 milliseconds. Maybe we give it a bit more release. 200 milliseconds sounds right. Okay, so now we're going to start doing the filtering. If we just bring down this frequency here, and we can hear basically the effect of the filter taking out all of that high end, but now we want to make a bit more of a plucky shape. So I'm going to bring down the sustain on this too, down to 0. And decay at about 1000 milliseconds sounds right to me. Okay, so now we probably want to open up this filter a bit more. So we can control that with this envelope amount. Okay, that sounds nice, and you can try and just play with the frequency here. So we're basically setting the lowest portion of the filter. So when it's closed, it's going to be at 248 Hertz at the moment, and then it uses this envelope amount to raise it up and bring it back down. So let's just listen to this. We want kind of like a nice subby tail. We want the initial hit of the sound to be have that like bite of the higher harmonics. So I think that sounds right. And now most of the character of the sound is going to come from this resonance. It sounds really nice in my opinion, especially in analog. I think we can bring down this envelope amount actually. Okay, so if we just turn on this EQ, we can see the general shape of the sound. So that's pretty much what we're looking for. We want a nice full sub region over here, and then we want quite a presence of mid-range here, especially when you play this in the mix, and there's lots of other elements. Most of the sound that you'll be hearing is going to be coming from this range here. And that's what that resonance helps with. We can also boost it slightly using this EQ, and we can also bring up the sub a bit more. Okay, and now on the original sound I had a second oscillator, so let's turn this on, and then what we can do is just pitch it up an octave. So we've got basically 2 oscillators covering 2 octaves. But now that doesn't sound too good. It's just too loud at the moment. It's kind of like overshadowing that lower octave. So what I want to do is just turn this one down quite a bit. So we're just getting a little bit of that higher octave in there. And then if we want to give the sound a little bit more tack, a little bit more punch, we can start using these pitch envelopes on the oscillators. You'll see if you click on the oscillator, we've got this pitch section, and we can raise up the initial here, and then you'll hear it pitch down. Let's actually just do it on this one first. But now that pitch is too long, so let's just bring down the time here. Maybe bring down the initial. We just want a little bit of a punch from it. And then we want to copy that pretty much the exact same thing to the second oscillator. So just remember the parameters we have here, 44 and 16. So set that to 44 and time to 16. Okay, so then the last thing that's left to do with this is to just give it a little bit of saturation. So you can just search for Ableton Saturator and then load it up here. And basically how I set up my saturators is on this one I set it to soft sine. I just prefer the sound of it, and then just bring up the drive to taste. So if I just reset these parameters, you can already hear that saturation working even without any drive. But let's just bring up the drive here, and you can hear it gets a lot louder. So you kind of want to match the amount that you're putting in by taking out that amount from the output. Maybe just bring down the output to about -17, and then bring the drive up until you really hear it distorting. And that's way too much, so let's just bring it back down. In this case, yeah, I think about 9 is good. So let's just bring up the output to around 9. And then I always want to like A/B it to make sure that the sound actually sounds better with the saturator. So basically turn this off, play it, turn it off and on. And here we can hear the sound gets louder, and I don't want that to happen because then it's tricking me into thinking that it sounds better when it might not actually sound better. So this is called gain staging. Let's take the output and bring it down a bit more. And we basically want the volume not to change when we turn on the saturator. All we want to do is hear the saturation. So that sounds pretty well gain staged to me. And it's just given the sound a little bit more character. Yeah, giving it a bit of life. It's basically increasing the harmonics in the mid-range and just making the sound stand out a little bit more. Alright, so that's the groove pluck. Another thing I just want to suggest when you are working with this, depending from song to song, all the other elements, your kick drum, all of that, the tempo of the track, you almost always want to sit there and just play with the attack and decay on this filter and see what makes the bass line feel its grooviest and sit the nicest in the mix. So just sit there and play with decay. Maybe a shorter decay like this will sound better in the track. And to me that sounds a little more groovy compared to this longer decay. So yeah, just always play with that and see what sounds better in the track.
Just a quick break before we go back to the tutorial. If you find these type of videos helpful, we can highly recommend the PML Academy with over 35 full-length online courses, spreading over topics like writing chords and melodies, or arranging your songs, to producing entire songs from start to finish. So check out the link in the description to see what's inside the All Courses bundle exactly.
Okay, so the second sound is this sustained fifth, I've called it. I don't really know if there's a name for this kind of a bass line. So the general thinking behind this sound is to take, again, like two waveforms. It could be two saws, or a saw and a square, or a saw and a triangle, and you're essentially pitching one of them up an octave and a fifth, and kind of blending them together and filtering them, and then you get that really nice rich sound with all those really nice harmonics, those perfect fifths above it. So let's just turn off the effects here and duplicate the sound. Okay, so let's just load up analog again. We're using analog for this, and this is how it sounds. Okay, so not very interesting in that way. So the first thing I want to do is just shape the amp envelope. At the moment it's got this like harsh attack, and that's because of the shape here. You can see it starts loud and then drops down in volume. Let's have it sustained, completely sustained. So bring the sustain up to 1. And then we can go into our first oscillator, and we want to make sure that this first oscillator is playing in the sub region. Okay, it's a little bit high, so I think we can pitch it down an octave. And let me just turn off these EQ points here so we're not affecting the sound. I just want to use the EQ visually for now. Okay, let's turn off the second oscillator. Okay, so that's essentially what I want here. Here's a nice saw wave sitting in the sub range. And then we can go into the master section here and go to the voices and set it to mono again, because we don't want any of the notes overlapping with each other and kind of creating a mess. And then we're going to just bring down this filter a little bit. And for this, we want a little bit of a pluck, but not quite as obvious as it is at the moment. So let's bring up this sustain almost to 1 and then have like a long decay. So the initial hit of the sound is just a little bit brighter. Let's bring down the frequency a bit more. Okay, so now we'll adjust that frequency even more, but I want to bring in that second oscillator, and this is kind of where all the character from the sound comes. So what we want to do is pitch this up 7 semitones, and that's your perfect fifth. Almost immediately, you know, you have the sound that you're after. Okay, so in the version that I made, it also has a bit of glide on it. So you'll hear it like bending between notes. So here we can go to this section and turn on glide. And we can just play with this percentage here. I think that sounds nice over there. So that's basically the sound at its core. This is how you make it, but there's a few other things we can do to make it a bit more interesting. We can play with saturation again. So these are the settings I used, just like in the last one. The soft sine, the drive are pretty high. And you can hear that sound gets so much richer with the saturation on. It really does make a big difference. So next up, we're going to go into this EQ. And I just gave it a little bit of a bump in the sub. And then quite a bit of a bump here around 1K. Just because I like the character that little bump gives. So without it, with. Okay, then lastly I just added a little bit of reverb, and the important thing with the reverb is to use this low cut to take out the reverb from the low end, because we don't want any reverb on the sub. And then I have a decay of 3 seconds, and then the dry wet's at 38%. And I also set the quality to high, just to get the best quality reverb. So yeah, depending on how much energy you want in the track, you want to just play with this cutoff frequency here and maybe bring it down. Yeah, just play with that and see where you want it in your track. There's no rules, so experiment and see where it fits. Okay, then the last one is this rolling bass. Super common sound in like most progressive and melodic house styles. Let's just duplicate this, and there's the MIDI. So let's just go in here and turn off all of the effects that we added. So yeah, this is quite a involved sound in terms of effects, but it doesn't need to be that complicated. So yeah, we're using Wavetable for this, and I just like the more sort of digital synths for this type of sound, because you have so much more like accuracy and control over the shape of the envelopes and stuff like that. So generally I would be using something like Serum, third-party synth, for this sound, but I think the next best thing would be Wavetable in Ableton. Okay, so we've got Wavetable open, and now the first thing we want to do is set it up to be a saw wave. And we can immediately hear that some of the notes are overlapping and kind of getting a bit ugly. So make sure we set it to mono. Here it's currently set to poly. On analog, we set it to mono by clicking on this drop down arrow, but on this one, all you do is click on the poly button and it becomes mono. Okay, now the notes are no longer overlapping. So let's first go into our amp section here, and we want to bring the decay and sustain down. So the sustain needs to be at -infinity, and the decay, I'd say around 420 is good. And then let's just bring down this frequency. Here you can see on the original one I automated the frequency, so let's actually save that automation. I'm just going to re-enable it. So you can hear it currently basically takes out all of the high end. Can't hear anything, so what we need to do is increase the envelope amount, and we can use envelope 2 here and map it to the frequency amount by going into the matrix. And then make sure that you click on frequency over here, re-enable that automation again, so that when you go into the matrix, you've got this frequency highlighted here, and you can map stuff to it. So here we can go to envelope 2, and we just increase this parameter. And then you hear that filter opening up. And now I want to basically adjust the timing of this second envelope so that we get the length of pluck that we're after. And I actually have a bit of a sweet spot for this. I find between 300 to 450 usually sounds good to me. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so that's basically the core of the sound, is to make this short, plucky sound that has a nice top end in it. And then you go in and you just set this filter frequency amount to taste. Right, then I start adding effects. The first thing I usually add would be like a chorus, just to add a little bit of width to it. It's subtle, but it does widen the sound ever so slightly. And then I added this EQ8 to just take out some of the high end. And then saturator, as always. And that's probably adding a bit too much volume, but I think the reason I did that is I just wanted the sound to be louder. But initially when I set it up, I would have gain staged it and made sure that it's actually improving the sound. Yeah, and it's just giving that top end a little bit more bite, which is nice. So then I just turned this up because I wanted the overall volume to be louder. And then another EQ8. Just boosting that sub and just taking out the very hissy top end. Okay, so this is like a completely creative process, and it's always good to experiment and kind of make your own version of the sound. So that's why I just went in and I messed with erosion. And erosion basically is a great little tool if you want to add like an interesting high end to any sound. It's got these 3 different modes, and here I've used this sine mode, which almost sounds like the same effect as bit crushing has, or not bit crushing, downsampling. So without it, sounds like this. With it, yeah, you can it gives it that like really nice, like almost digital, like artifacting on the top end. And then I've got this really short delay, which is almost like a slapback delay. And it's important here to use this filter section to just take out that low end. So you can just drag this around and just take out the low end, because we don't really want to be affecting the sub with this delay. I just wanted to use this to add some space on the top end. So I've unsynced this delay, set it to 114 milliseconds on ping pong mode, and then brought the dry wet down to taste. And then we've got another reverb here, and again, important to take out the low end using the filter section. Here, what I've done is I've taken the size down to almost its smallest, I think. Yeah, it doesn't go any smaller than that. I wanted a really small room reverb, and then I've got a short decay, 710 milliseconds, and then I've also played with this pre-delay. I think it just gives it it puts it in a space, but it also gives it this like really cool width to it. And then yeah, just adjusting this dry wet to taste. So yeah, again, it's a creative process. You might not like the sound of the erosion. You could take that off. But I think it kind of brings the sound a bit more to the front. I really like it. You could always filter out a little bit of that really, really high top end at the end of it. And you would still get the effect of the erosion bringing the sound more to the front of the mix. Okay, so then further things you could try. Sometimes I like to mix in a second oscillator and maybe put it like one octave higher. So maybe set this to 12. And then you might want to just bring down the volume of that. And maybe you try it as like a perfect fifth. You could set that to 7 semitones. Or even higher. Yeah, we can go to 19. That gives it some nice character. So yeah, just get creative. You might want to layer it with another wavetable. So what you could do is group it. So I've just hit Shift and Control G to group it. And then you could make a second chain. That second chain, you could turn off the first oscillator and make like a wide version of the second oscillator by turning on this unison here, setting it to something like, I don't know, try classic, bring up the voices. And if we solo this one, now we've got this kind of like wide sound, and just blend them back together. You know, now you've got a nice full sound too. So yeah, it's just about getting creative and making your own version of the sound. The point of this video is to show you general process for making these types of sounds, and then you can go in and get creative and make it your own. All right, I hope that was helpful. Thanks for watching. If you want to get more involved in sound design, we have some courses linked below. I hope you have a lovely day, and I'll see you at the next one.